Hey, we're Diane and Sam. 2 years ago we bought a bus with the ambitious goal of converting it ourselves into a tiny home. The first year we spent procrastinating a lot of the time as the task ahead really overwhelmed us. And when we were thinking about the bus, we were either demolishing all the niggly little bits like old rubber, sealant, dusty insulation, or metal panels held on by rivets. Oh yes, and rust. There was a bit of rust to get rid of as well. After coming up with our perfect floor plan and getting the bus down to her bones, we began the build officially in 2023. We have now finished the conversion of our bus and it is a beautiful tiny home, fully functional and off-grid, and everything that we dreamed it would be. The bus has a full solar system, it has 400 litres of fresh water, a full bathroom with a shower that is probably better than any that I've ever had in a rental, and even a compost toilet. So now that we are at the final end of the build, we are all finished up and waiting for her to be roadworthy, I wanted to sit down with you guys and talk through the full breakdown in cost of how much it actually cost us to take it from a school bus to a fully functioning tiny home. Today we are going to talk about exactly how much Sam and I spent on this conversion, from getting the bus to doing the build out, as well as all the roadworthy things and all the unexpected costs that add up along the way that you may not realize might be there. So whether you're watching this because you're just curious or whether you're wanting to do a conversion yourself, I hope this information is insightful to what's coming up ahead and you can prepare yourself. We did this whole build debt free because we had a bit of money saved up that we were hoping to use for a deposit for a house, but instead we used to build the house. But the actual cost of converting a bus will really depend on the vehicle that you buy, what's accessible in your area as far as materials go, and also what you choose to do with the build yourself. We really kept it budget friendly for ourselves by doing a lot of secondhand and reclaimed materials and keeping it quite simple, but I know that there are definitely buses out there that have a lot more money put into them, and if that's more your style, then that's fine too. That's the beauty of bus life, conversion, and van life as well. The way that the bus turns out and the cost of it is really up to you and what you do. But I'm excited to share the cost of what we've done because I was actually quite shocked with the number. It was what I was hoping for, but the fact that we actually stayed true to that was amazing. So let's get into it. The most crucial cost is the bus itself. Our bus cost us 14,000 Australian dollars. We ended up having to drive up towards Sydney to pick it up, so it was like a 5-hour trip for us, staying with a friend and then coming back down. Our bus is a 12.5 metre Metrotech Delta bus with a Cummins engine. We picked it for a few main reasons and I have outlined them in a separate video that I'll link down below. Some of the main reasons were the storage bins underneath, the engine, the height inside, and well, it was available, so that was a big factor too. One of the first jobs on the build was installing water tanks. We have 400 litres of fresh water and 100 litres of grey water. The tanks themselves cost us $2,000 all up, but then we also had to buy connectors and steel poles and steel bits to actually mount the water tanks, which was around $200 as well. And then we also had to buy hoses and connectors to actually access the water out of the tank. So that was about $300 more. So all up, the water cost us $2,500. Next, I want to talk to you guys about some of our bigger expenses. These are things that we definitely knew we wanted to invest in first off, and that were also going to set us back the most if we didn't think about them straight away. So the most expensive parts of our build were things like our utilities, our gas, our water, and our solar system. For our electricity, we run both 12 volt and 240 volt appliances in the bus. Both of these run by our solar system, which can plug into mains or a generator if there isn't enough sun to charge the system. We have only gone with a basic system so far, but still it cost us $8,000. In summer it recharges well and allows us to be off-grid quite easily. But winter has definitely been a challenge as our solar panels don't quite pull in enough solar power, so we have had to rely on plugging into mains more often. And as far as battery storage goes, we only have one battery. Sam has covered all of the solar components in a separate video, so once again, I'll leave it down below. I'm not going to go into this cost breakdown. Now, as I mentioned before, $8,000 was only just the brains of the system. There were a lot more costs that went into powering our bus and the electricity behind it. So some of those other things are things like wires inside and outside of the bus, switches to actually turn things on, the equipment to solder things together as well as all the connectors themselves, the M4 connectors that join up all of our solar panels in series, steel to install the solar panels onto the roof. The solar panels themselves were secondhand given to us by a friend. This is something we want to upgrade in the future and will be a future cost, but as it isn't right now, I'm not including that in the cost. So all of these bits and pieces came to around $400. And then the 240 volt, which we had to get connected by a qualified electrician here in Australia. We had a friend come out to do that for us, which we're so grateful for, and that was another $700. So all up, the electricity costs were $9,100, which to put into perspective was about a third of the cost of the build. Yeah, solar power isn't cheap, but is necessary if we want to be off grid and be able to power our house and all of the things we use power for. The other big expense was our gas hookup. If we were to do the build all over again, we probably wouldn't invest our money into gas, knowing now how much it costs, but back then we didn't, so we did. If we were to do the whole build again, we probably would skip installing gas and instead invest our money into another battery for our solar system and use induction instead. Regardless though, we are happy because as cooks we appreciate cooking with gas, and our water heater actually runs better off gas than it does off electricity. It's much more efficient, and that's another cost. It was about $500 back then. I think they've doubled in price now, so we got really lucky investing in that nice and early. Alright, so as far as gas goes, let's add it all up. First we had to build a custom box, which was $160 for the door and $280 to create the steel box that the gas sits in. We also had to get an extension cowl for the water heater itself so that it could vent outside of the bus. It didn't quite reach past the wall. This was $135. There were some other gas components that we had to get, like vents and like labels and other things that the gas plumber needed. These came to $235. And similar to electricity, gas needs to be hooked up by a professional and certified, so we did have to get a plumber in, and that was a huge cost. Our plumber had to connect all the copper lines through the house and underneath the bus to our secondhand stove. The stove was $35 secondhand, and as far as the plumber visits goes, it was $930 for the first time that he came through and $600 for the second time, including the certificate. So in total, gas came to $2,875. You see what I mean? If we had known that's how much it would have cost, we would have invested that money into a battery and just used an induction cooktop instead of using the gas. But you don't know what you don't know, so if you're hearing this and you're about to invest in a build, maybe avoid gas if you can. Let's move on to the shell of the bus, the walls, the ceilings, and the floor. Most of our bus already had marine plyboards on the floor, but we had to add a few more towards the back. So that cost us $580. On top of these, we have a hybrid floating floor system, which is a laminate and hardwood combination. These were secondhand for $400. All of the timber studs for our walls and our ceilings were either reclaimed pallet wood, pine wood studs donated by our friends, or they were new bits of wood bought from Bunnings or Mitre 10 to complete the project. These including all the insulation, which was mostly second-hand, window film to black out some of the windows that we weren't intending to use and we were covering up anyways with wool. These, as well as all of the edging fabric that we have used throughout the bus to neaten up any cuts, came to a total of $2,240. And just in case, I also added about $500 worth of screws. We do have a lot that we have reused from other projects that we've had or we've had sitting around the house, but we did have to buy metal screws. We also had to buy some other bolts and heavier duty screws as well. So though we reused a lot of screws, we still had to buy a decent amount. Speaking of reuse, I tried to reuse as many scraps as I could for things like curtain rods and edging to make each piece go as far as possible. It was numbing work, but necessary for staying in our budget. Speaking of the curtains, I made these myself to reduce our cost. I ended up just sewing some fabric from the op shop to some reflective car sunshades, and they work really great and only cost me $70. Next, let's talk about our favorite room, if you can call it that, on the bus, the kitchen. We designed our kitchen around our IKEA island, which we already owned, and for the rest of the kitchen we used predominantly secondhand materials. Our biggest expenses were the water heater and tanks, which I talked about before, but we also had to get a water pump, which was $130. The benches were repurposed from a table we already had, so there was no cost there. The sink, the tapware, and the dishwasher were all secondhand and came to a total of $380. Some other expenses here are things like the cost of all the pipes and fittings. We ended up going with John West fittings, which did not come cheap, but were necessary because a lot of the components we bought were caravan, and John West is the fitting that you use for them. But because we also had secondhand tapware, we ended up having to have Shark Bite on the opposite end and connect these two together. Try to avoid that if you can. Either stick with caravan plumbing or with household plumbing. Either way, all of these fittings came to $490. Lastly, our shelves and our railings in the kitchen that hold all of our beautiful jars cost around $200. As I mentioned earlier, we already had a lot of the furniture and we planned a lot around this to save us costs. I didn't include this in the final cost breakdown because what you have might be different to us, and if we didn't already invest our money into this furniture, we probably would have built it or bought something completely different, so there's just no point in including it here. But just to mention what they were things like our bed, things like our couch, the island in the kitchen, our TV, our computers, and some shelving that we had. The things I will include here are things that we specifically bought for the bus. So we had to mount our TV to the wall. This cost us $140. And we also had to mount some passenger seats to the front that had seat belts. We ended up just getting our engineer to do that for us, and that came into his full cost, which was also the cost of converting the bus from a bus to a motorhome, and that was $1,800. Throughout the bus we have some strip lighting, which was $150. Recently we also completely did up the front cockpit area and added shelving throughout the bus. So for all of the components like the recycled rubber flooring in the front, more plywood sheets for the ceiling, curtain rods and the curtains themselves, a makeshift driving boot and some other accessories that brought the area together, we spent another $2,200 to finish off the bus. One more thing we added recently is the rooftop air conditioner and heating system. This was $1,700 and was a wonderful gift from our friends and family for our wedding. Did I mention that while we were converting this bus, we were also saving up for a wedding and living as well? Yeah, it's been a very expensive year around here. The back of the bus at the time of filming is still yet to be complete. It's our project over summer when we head back to the Bega Valley in New South Wales, but just to keep things fair, I'm going to say it's probably going to cost us about $300 to just finish off the ply in the back, add a few shelvings, and that's if we don't use reclaimed materials, which we're likely to, but for now, $300 sounds fair. So the last place I want to talk about is our bathroom, which is complete, so I can talk about the costs here. First of all the waterproofing that we had to use for the bathroom and which we extended into the kitchen as well, that cost us $100. We used secondhand tiles for the floor, stuck them down with adhesive, which had I known back then I would have gotten a big tub of adhesive because I ended up using a lot more than I thought I would. Instead, I was buying little containers again and again as I was running out. So if you're sticking down tiles, just go for the biggest size. It's the most cost efficient. Learn from my mistake. But sticking down the tiles, grouting on top of them, repurposing bottle caps with spray paint, all of that came to a total of roughly $250. The shower head in our bathroom is also secondhand and was $100, but we did realize once we put it in that the mixer in it was broken, and this was $70 to repair and 2 months waiting for it to arrive. Let's not relive that trauma. The shower pan in our bathroom cost us $140, and then the compost toilet, which was built by me and works amazingly by the way, cost about $240. That includes the seat, the urine diverter, and all of the parts and timber to build it, plumb it, and get it working. The last part of the build is the paint. So we have green paint, we have black chalkboard paint, all of the primer, and also sealant throughout the bus. And paint ended up being a really pricey thing. I remember anytime I bought paint, I was like, ah! It was $440 for all that. And that's just for like one room. Oof. Needless to say, we'll be painting the outside of the bus much later. We did end up buying a few things that we didn't use, and so we had about $220 worth of losses, I would say. We did get a lot better at returning things towards the end and getting our money back, so we did end up returning about $150 worth of things, so I'm not including that in the cost. Some other costs that added up in the build, things like silicone, we went through a lot of that, rivets, the rivet gun, and drill bits because we broke a lot of them throughout the build. I have accounted for about $500 worth of costs there too. So all up, the cost of the actual build component of the bus was $27,625. I do also want to now mention some of the roadworthy and mechanical side of the bus, because this is definitely going to be different for you depending on your bus and the health of the engine and the vehicle itself, but gives you a rough estimate of at least the basics of what you should expect for the costs. We still have one more visit to the mechanic before this is complete, but I'm just going to give you the cost of what it is right now. So some of you may have noticed I did end up breaking our windscreen, and to repair this it cost $1,300. We ended up hiring a friend to come and help us out as a labor trade, and he insisted on doing it for free, but we knew the work that was involved in it, so we ended up paying him $1,500. Anytime we needed to move our bus because it was unregistered, we needed to get a permit. In New South Wales, you can only get 1 day at a time. In Victoria, they give you up to 28 days total at a time. So all up, permits cost us about $250. I haven't included fuel cost, but we did end up, I think we spent $1,200 so far in fuel. Our mechanic visit ended up costing us $2,200. We did have to get 3 new tires and a few little bits and bobs that came together to that. In order to get our roadworthy, we did do a pre-check, which was $330. This gave us a list of all of the things it needed, which was really helpful, and I highly recommend before going for the roadworthy. We ended up having to buy some parts for that, including lights, a horn, and getting a little pump for our washers. These came to about $350, and then the roadworthy itself is going to be another $1,000. And finally, to get the bus registered towards the end in Victoria cost $780. Considering we have a fully self-sufficient home, which is not only just a home, but it can drive anywhere as well. It has a full bathroom, a kitchen, and room to expand our family in as well. for $50,000 is amazing. So we are really proud of all of the work that we put in. Now, sure, this would have been different if a builder did it. Maybe they would have done it faster or they would have done it different, but that's a huge saving if you ask me.